Okay, in order to make the shooting game, you're going to need to go to the Scratch website and make sure that you've logged in. Once you've done that, click on Create and you'll open up the Scratch editor that you will have seen last lesson. Rather than shooting cats, which would be cruel, we're going to shoot ghosts, so we need to get rid of the cat. So to do that, we right click on the cat down here and go to Delete. The first thing that we're going to make is we're going to make the crosshair, which is the gun sight, which we want to follow the mouse around. So to do that, we're going to go to Paint New Sprite. I'm going to make sure that we've got black selected, and I'm going to use the circle to draw a circle roughly in the middle. That might be slightly too thin, so I'm going to delete that one, click back on the black and off the circle and back on, and change the line to be slightly thicker, just so that it's more visible. So I'm going to draw one circle there, then I'm going to draw another one a little bit smaller, use the hand to move it into the center, and then going to use the line tool to draw out a crosshair, and using the paintbrush we'll have a red laser dot in the middle. Once we've done that, we need to make sure that this is perfectly centered to the screen. Now to do that, if you click on this button up here, you'll get a cross come up. You need to then hold the left mouse button down. You can move that around. You need to move it to the very center of your crosshair and let go, and it will adjust your sprite so that it's right in the middle. Once you've done that, click back on Scripts at the top, and we need to put some simple code so that this follows the mouse around. To do that, we're going to have, in the Events tab, we're going to choose When Flag Clicked. What we want to happen is, forever, we want that sprite to go to mouse pointer. Now it's slightly too big at the moment, so we're going to shrink that down so that it looks roughly like that. Then when we click the flag, the crosshair follows the mouse around. Press stop to stop that bit of code running. Now that we've done that, it's probably a good idea to save this, so we're going to change it from Untitled and call it Shooting Game, and press File, Save Now. Okay, once you've done that, we need to create another sprite, which is going to be the ghost that we're going to be shooting at. So click on this button here, choose Sprite from Library. Once you click on that, you scroll down, not all the way, and you'll find a ghoul. Choose that and press OK. We now need to start adding some code to this. So on the Control tab, on the Events menu, you're going to select when space key is pressed. We want something to happen, because what we want is when the cursor is over the ghoul, you press space and we want it to disappear. So once the key has been pressed, we need to also check if the mouse cursor is over the top of the sprite. So forever, we're going to check if something happens, and we're going to say when the space key is pressed, if it is touching the mouse pointer, then we want something to happen. So what we want to happen now is we want the ghost to disappear off the screen. So what we're going to do is, in motion, we're going to say go to XY, and we're going to pick a number that is off the screen. So 300 and 300 will make it look like the sprite has disappeared, but really it will be hiding out the way up here. What we then need to do is make sure that this sprite doesn't do anything else. So in the Events menu, in the Control menu, we're going to choose Stop, and then we're going to change it to other scripts in this sprite. So anything else that we do on here will stop. I'm going to move that down there because in a moment we're going to be creating another bit of script at the top here. Before we do that though, it's probably slightly too big, our sprite, so we use the shrink tool just to shrink it down and make the game a little bit more difficult. Okay, what we now need to do is we need to get this ghost moving randomly around the screen. So to do that, in the Events tab, we're going to say when the flag is clicked, we want the motion of this sprite to go to a certain point of X and Y. Remember, X is across the screen and Y is up and down the screen. Now, we roughly want it to be between 130 on the Y axis, minus 130 at the bottom, and roughly minus 180 and 180 for the X axis. I'll show you what that means in a moment, but to do that we're going to go into operators and we're going to use this pick random 1 to 10 and drop it in this first lozenge here. So we're going to say go to an X value of somewhere between minus 180 and 180. If I now run that and keep pressing the flag, you'll see that the ghoul moves to a random place along the X axis but doesn't disappear off the screen, which is why we've chose 180. We now need to do the same for the Y axis, so we're going to say pick a random number for the Y, this time 130 to minus 130, click on the flag, keep pressing the flag, and that means that the ghoul will move randomly around the screen. So at the moment, when the flag's clicked, it will go to a random place on the screen. However, we want it to glide around the screen, so we need to add in another little bit of code, which is going to be a forever loop to start with. So go into the control menu and choose forever, and what we want it to do forever, or until we shoot it, we want it to, in the motion menu, glide a number of seconds to an X and Y value. I've found that 0.7 seems a good amount of seconds to glide to make the game still playable but difficult at the same time. Now, we don't always want it to go to the same position, so what we're going to do is again use these two random numbers. Instead of typing them out again, we can right click on them and go to duplicate, put them in the correct box, and it will speed things up a little bit. If we now click the flag, the ghost or ghoul moves around randomly until you shoot it with the spacebar, when it moves almost off the screen, but the user perhaps won't notice that anyway. The next bit that we're going to do is to set the backdrop. So to do that, if we click on choose background from library, and you can pick which background you choose, but I found that the hallway outdoor one looks quite good, and it will set that as your backdrop. You'll need to click back onto scripts. It may take a while, might freeze a little bit, but once you've done that, we should be able to put some script over here. Now what we want to do next is to set up the scoring system. So to do that, we're going to click on data and we're going to click on make variable. A variable is something that we can store things in and we can use it later on and display it on the screen. So this variable name is going to be score. Press OK and it will create a score box up here and give you some extra boxes that you can use down here. Now what we want to happen is, on the control menu, on the events menu, sorry, every time the space key is pressed, we want the score to go down. It'll only go up if the mouse is touching one of the ghosts. However, if it's not, we want the score to go down. So when the space key is pressed, we want data and we want to change the score by -1. What that means is every time we press the spacebar, the score will go down by 1. Now that will also happen if we're touching the ghost when it happens. However, what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to set the score to change by 11 if we're hitting a ghost, which means that when we've done the 11, if we take into account the -1, you'll get 10 points every time you hit a ghost. Okay, what we then need to do is make sure that when we do shoot one of the ghosts that it increases the score by 10. As I said, we've got to do that as 11 because we're taking one away every time we click the mouse. So, on the ghoul sprite, what we need to do is, using the data menu, we need to change the score, and we're going to put it just above the stop. We're going to change it by 11, which will mean that the score changes by 10 once the other one's been taken off. Okay, what we now need is a way of saying that the game's over, so we're going to have a game over screen. To do that, we're going to paint a new sprite, and we're going to use the text tool. You can set it to whatever colour you like, but I'm going to go with black and put game over, and then click off it, and you can resize it to be a lot bigger. We can then go back to the scripts, and if we right click on sprite 2 and go to info, we can give it a more sensible name. Click the back arrow, so now we've got our game over sprite. Move it to wherever you want it to be, so I'm going to have it appearing on the path down the bottom. And now what we want to do is we want to make that appear once all of our 10 ghouls, which we haven't got yet but we will do soon, have all disappeared off the screen. To do that, we're going to create another variable by clicking on the data menu and clicking on make variable, and I just want you to call it number. Press OK and you'll have another box appear up here, so that we can change things for our variable number. Now what we're going to do is, every time we shoot one of the ghouls, we're going to increase this number by 1, and then when it hits a certain number, we'll know that they've all disappeared. To do that, on the ghoul sprite, what we need to do is, like we did with the change score by 11, we need to change the number by 1. That's going to increase this number over here by 1 each time. However, because we're going to end up with 10 ghouls, it's going to increase it by more than 1 each time, because each ghoul is going to be increasing it by 1. So what it actually ends up being is, once we've shot all of the 10, this number always ends up being 19. So what we're going to do is set some script on the game over sprite. So click on the game over sprite, and at the moment we haven't got any code on there. So if you click onto events, and when flag is clicked, the first thing that we're going to need to do is make sure that this is not visible. So we need to go into looks and then hide. What we're also going to do is set the number back to 0, because it's going to be a new game. So we're going to say set number to 0. Then, for the entire time that the game's running, so we're going to put a forever link in, we need to check whether or not that number has hit 19. And when it has, we'll get the game over to appear. So we're going to have an if then in here, and then in operators we're going to use this one, which has an equals between it. So what we're going to say is, if, in the data menu, if the number equals, you type in 19, then in looks we want that sprite to show. We also want the whole program to stop running, so in control we go to stop all. One other thing that we need to do is, every time we start the game we want the score to reset back to 0. So making sure that we've got the game over sprite selected, click on data and say set. It'll say number at the moment, but we can change that to score, so it also sets the score to 0. So when you press the flag, both the score and the number go back to 0. Okay, one of the last bits that we now need to do is to include a high score. So to do that, again we need to make another variable. So click on the data menu, and then click on make variable and call it high score. Press OK, and we'll get another variable here available to us. Then on the game over sprite we need to put an if statement on, so that we can check whether or not our score is greater than the current high score. To do that, we're going to put a control if statement, and we're going to put it inside this other if. because we only want to check once the game's over. The only problem with doing that is the show and the stop all end up going inside that if, and we don't want that, so drag those so that they go underneath it so that it looks like that. What we're then going to do in here, we're going to put in another operator to see whether or not our score is greater, which is the arrow pointing to the right, greater than the current high score. So what we're going to say is in data, if our score is greater than the high score, then we want to set the high score to be the current score. Okay folks, I've got a little confession to make. I've made a mistake on this, well, 2 mistakes. So as long as you followed me correctly, you will have also made these same mistakes. Fairly easy to change. The first thing I want you to do is, where I've said if number equals 19, you need to change that to 10. And also, if you click on the ghoul down here, when I said when the space key is pressed, I've got a forever loop. We don't need the forever. We just need to have the if. So take the forever out by dragging it like I just did. You can then right click on forever and go to delete. There was no way I was going back through the whole video changing that, so hopefully you've been able to make those changes. If you haven't, just ask your teacher and they'll sort you out. Okay. Right, one of the final things that we need to do is to make sure that we have 10 of these ghouls. So to do that, if you right click on the ghoul and say duplicate, and we need to do that 9 times so that we end up with 10, because obviously we've already got one. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and if you just scroll down, hopefully our last one should be ghoul 10. And now what we can do, if we click on the flag, hopefully all of our ghouls will move around. If we press the space bar and not hit anything, so down here you can see the score at the top going down by -1 each time. If we hit a ghoul, if I manage to, it goes up by 10, so we're now on 5. Once you've managed to shoot all of them, hopefully, as long as we've done everything correctly, it should pop up and say game over. Now obviously this time our high score has automatically changed to 91 because we didn't have one before. You can see the numbers got to number 10. If we were to play this again and beat the high score, it would replace it. If we don't beat the high score, then it won't replace it. So one way of cheating is to hold down the space bar. However, it tends to be that because of all the -1s, you end up with a very low score and it doesn't replace the high score. One last thing you're probably going to want to do just to make it more user friendly is we don't need to let the user see the number. So if we untick that box there, it will make the number disappear. We can perhaps move the high score up to the top like that. Hopefully your game's working. If it isn't, ask your teacher and they'll try and fix whatever problems that you've got. If not, go back to parts of the video that you think might be causing the problem and see if you can figure it out for yourself.